Ahead of the 2024 general elections, the Electoral Commission has prioritized democracy education for the youth of South Africa. This is just not aimed at school learners, but also the youth at tertiary educational institutions and those outside the formal educational and workplace structures. In South Africa, the youth played a historically important role in achieving electoral democracy. They were active citizens and made an immense contribution towards the liberation of this country. Many of them even lost their lives in the pursuit of freedom and the democracy that we all enjoy today. However, young people in the post-apartheid era form part of the phenomenon, of electoral abstention, which is becoming prevalent in many countries around the world. For example, voter turnouts during the 2021 municipal elections was a mere 46%, which was the lowest in the history of a democratic South Africa. During the 2021 municipal elections, nearly 1.8 million eligible 18 to 19-year-olds did not register to vote. This translates into 1.8 million potential votes in these elections because one cannot vote if one is not registered to vote, and consequently not all on the voters' roll. But I just want to bring your attention to this graphic that we'll be bringing up shortly about youth participation and South Africa's voting population. So we know that we've got a voting population of over 39 million, but currently we have 27.7 million people that are on the voters' roll. I just want to bring your attention to the age of 18 to 39 cohort. You've got a voting population from the age of 18 to 19. You've got a voting population of over 2 million. But unfortunately, those who are certified on the voters' roll are over, or rather less than, a million. Of the new registration, of the new voter registration, 77% are young people under the age of 29. And of course, we know that from earlier on this year, the voter registration that the IEC had actually told us about, you had new registrations of young people that are actually sitting at that over 500 that we were talking about. The age category of 20 to 29 now sits at over 4.4 million, which represents 48.6% measured against the voting age population. In terms of the provinces that have registered the highest number of young people, you have KZN at over 100,000. You then have Gauteng at over 82,000 and the Eastern Cape at 43,673. So we'll be talking to Tessa Dooms, who's the director at Rivonia Circle, and she joins us for this conversation. Tessa, thank you so much for joining us on SABC News. I think you've heard those stats. We've got a voting population of over 39 million, but Tessa, we've got over 27 people that are actually registered on the voters' roll. You talk about young people. South Africa has a youthful population. In light of that, how crucial is it that young people actually participate in this year's polls?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that there are 27.7 million people on the voters' roll, and about 11 million of those are below the age of 39 in total right now. But it's worth noting that that is about 2 to 3 million less than there was in 2019. And so we've actually seen a decline in younger people coming into the electoral system. And that is something to be concerned about. About 40 million South Africans in total are below the age of 40. And of course, that includes children as well. But you then understand that we are a youthful country and a youthful population. The majority of the 60 million people who are here are young, and they are either children, they're adolescents, but many of them are young adults who have the responsibility of those children and adolescents, who bear the responsibility even for aging parents. And so young people, particularly those that we think of as youth and dialogue, those people in their 20s and their 30s, bear great responsibility about what happens with the future of the country. So when it comes to voting, although they have so much at stake, young people don't understand that they have a responsibility, but also power in this election to affect change. And so even though that 11 million is less than it was in 2019, it's still quite a big chunk of the electorate. It's about 42% of the electorate that's registered to vote at this point. Just to give you a comparison, in 2019, the highest party to get votes got about 10 million votes. So young people as a voting bloc, if they all voted for a cat or the cat party would get more votes than the highest party got in 2019. That's the power of the youth vote. And I don't think that young people and young voters realize and recognize that power.
Tessa, I like the fact that you mentioned a decline in young people going out to the polls. You have our unemployment rate, which is just this week soared to 32.9%. We've got high levels of crime, poverty, corruption, and inequality. Do you think that these are some of the factors that have made young people despondent to politics in our country?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, young people in the work that we've done have told us consistently that they do not feel like democracy is delivering for them as young people, that they feel like even in terms of the vote, they get a vote, but somebody else gets the benefit that comes after that vote. And so I'm not seeing the dividends of development for young people who are in a context of high youth unemployment, in a context where basic services like water, sanitation, housing are simply not being delivered anymore under a dysfunctional state. But also just the prospects for being able to live a quality life in South Africa. Young people are just not seeing the rewards of that. And I think that does make them despondent. But I think what is more discouraging, and this goes beyond young people, is the idea that we haven't really seen major shifts at the national provincial level for a long time. So the last time we saw a province changing hands of political parties was 15 years ago when the DA went into coalition and then eventually took over governing the Western Cape. And so young people who, in the last 15 years have been eligible to vote have not seen at national and provincial levels major shifts of hands of power. And so they don't know that the vote actually can be used for that purpose. And then, of course, at the municipal level, we know that we've seen those shifts of power. We've got over 80 municipalities or councils that are hung councils that are not outright winners. And that tells us there are shifts. But of course, we focus all of our attention on dysfunctional coalitions like the one you see in the city of Joburg or the one you see in Nelson Mandela Bay. And so again, they feel like they're not sure that the vote is going to deliver something better or can deliver change at all. And I do think that this is a pivotal election, not for us to dramatically change the landscape, but for us to remind ourselves that we actually can affect change. And I think the most important conversation that I've been having with people is that the more people show up, the more competitive the election is and more unpredictable the result is. And so showing up matters, and young people are a big part of that.
You're so correct. But Tessa, do you think that this is also a global phenomenon? I mean, time and time again, and you've also been part of, those research sessions that you've held as well in your organization. Is this a global phenomenon where young people don't resonate with, the political powers or political leaders? I mean, there's been a concept of democratic backsliding that's been thrown around right now.
No, certainly there is. There's two ways in which democratic backsliding is showing up. One is in lower voter participation over time, and the other is in people actually coming back to the polls but voting against what we think of as established parties. So it doesn't show up in the same ways. And when I say voting against established parties, we've seen, particularly in Europe and the United States, even in South America, you've seen authoritarians who talk against democracy actually getting voted in through the ballot and through democracy. But I want to talk about the first category because usually when you see a decline in voter participation, it's in context of relative stability and relative progress. The better a country does in terms of its development outcomes, the less people think they need the vote in order for their lives to be stable. They see the vote as just political gameplay. In our context, though, that's not true. Right now, the state of our lives in general is not great. We are not seeing that we have this kind of stable, basic life that we need. And so our politics changing is part of the solution that we have to create. It's not just a mechanical thing. It's not just about, politics for the sake of politics. Right now, our politics is the difference between whether or not we have water, whether or not we have food, whether or not we have electricity, which is something we've all come to understand. And so we don't have the same luxury as many other countries that are having less and less people turn out. But we also don't have a crisis of our ballot being not being credible. And many other countries on the continent of Africa have this issue about not having credible elections. So we haven't had the issue of elections that are not credible. And so we should still be showing up in numbers, using the ballot as one of the tools in our toolbox of change. And again, I think what we haven't thought about is the ways in which showing up can help us with that. As you pointed out rightfully, the 2021 election was shocking because we were at 46%. But what was more shocking is that if you also counted in the 14 million people who didn't even register, our election turnout was actually below 30% in 2021. But the maths for elections are simple, and elections are about numbers. Okay. If 10 people show up to vote and 6 of them vote for one party, that party gets 60%. But in the same election, if 20 people show up and 6 vote for the same party, that party gets 30%. The more people show up, the harder it is for parties to get seats, easy, cheap, and free. And that's why showing up is important. It makes the outcome more unpredictable and definitely more competitive.
Okay, Tessa, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for that enlightful discussion. That was Tessa Dooms, a director at Rivonia Circle, a think tank organization, of course, talking about the importance of the youth vote.